The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat at my desk that Tuesday morning, unaware that this would be the day everything changed. The rain pelted against the office windows of our downtown marketing firm, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what started as just another ordinary workday. Outside, the city bustled with its usual energy. Commuters hurrying along wet sidewalks, taxis navigating through puddles, and the distant sounds of construction mixing with car horns and conversations from the street below. I had been with Richardson Marketing Solutions for 7 years, climbing from an entry-level coordinator to senior project manager, earning every promotion through late nights, weekend work, and consistently exceeding targets. The journey hadn't been easy. I remembered my first day, nervous and eager, carrying a worn leather portfolio my mother had given me as a graduation gift. Back then, the office had felt enormous and intimidating, filled with confident professionals who seemed to speak in acronyms and industry jargon I was still learning. My name is Sarah Chun, and I thought I knew how corporate politics worked. I thought dedication and results spoke louder than connections. I was about to learn how wrong I could be. Those 7 years had taught me the rhythm of corporate life, the ebb and flow of quarterly targets, the delicate dance of client relationships, the satisfaction of watching junior colleagues grow into confident professionals under my guidance. I had weathered economic downturns, celebrated major wins, and built a reputation as someone who could be trusted with the company's most challenging accounts. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more real workplace experiences like this one, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to help us bring you more authentic stories. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global community. That morning, I was preparing for our monthly team presentation to the executive board. My team of 5 had worked tirelessly on the Morrison account, a potential $2 million client that could transform our department's entire year. Morrison Industries was a family-owned manufacturing company looking to modernize their brand and expand into digital markets after 3 generations of traditional advertising approaches. The opportunity represented more than just revenue. It was a chance to showcase our department's evolution into a full-service digital marketing powerhouse. We had data, projections, creative concepts, and an implementation timeline that was both ambitious and realistic. The research phase alone had taken 6 weeks, involving focus groups, competitor analysis, industry trend studies, and consumer behavior mapping. Jennifer had created mock-ups for everything from social media campaigns to trade show displays. Marcus had developed demographic profiles so detailed they read like psychological studies. The entire team had invested countless hours, fueled by coffee and determination, working toward this moment. As I reviewed our PowerPoint for the 100th time, adjusting color schemes and fine-tuning our messaging strategy, I felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nerves that came with high-stakes presentations. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed. Every slide represented weeks of collaborative effort. Every chart reflected data we had gathered and analyzed ourselves. Every creative concept had been tested and refined through multiple iterations. The conference room on the 15th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's business district. Rain streaked down the glass, but inside, the atmosphere was warm and professional. From this height, the city spread out like a living map, office buildings with their own stories of ambition and setbacks, people moving through their professional lives, each carrying their own hopes and challenges. The view had always inspired me, reminding me that our work here was part of something larger than just quarterly reports and budget meetings. My team members, Marcus, Jennifer, David, Lisa, and Tom, filed in with their laptops and notebooks, each carrying their part of our collective effort. Marcus, our lead researcher, had the kind of analytical mind that could spot trends others missed. Jennifer brought creative vision that consistently surprised clients with its originality. David, our digital specialist, understood social media platforms and online behavior patterns better than people half his age. Lisa managed client relationships with an intuitive understanding of what people needed to hear, while Tom coordinated logistics with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. We had rehearsed this presentation 3 times, anticipating questions, preparing contingencies, and ensuring every slide transition was smooth. The night before, we had stayed until nearly 10 o'clock, running through the entire presentation one final time, adjusting timing, and discussing potential objections the board might raise. Everyone knew their role, their talking points, and their backup data. We were as ready as we could possibly be. That's when he walked in. Bradley Richardson, 26 years old, MBA from an expensive private university, and most importantly, son of our company's founder and CEO. He wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself, and had that particular smile that suggested he found most situations mildly amusing. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine, and his watch was the kind of Swiss timepiece that cost more than most people's cars. Brad had been with the company for 8 months, officially holding the title of Strategic Development Associate, which seemed to involve a lot of networking lunches and very few measurable deliverables. I had watched him drift through the office, attending meetings where he contributed little but received credit for collaborative success, taking extended lunches that somehow counted as client development, and generally embodying everything frustrating about nepotism in corporate America. His resume, which had somehow made its way through office gossip, was impressive on paper but light on actual experience. 2 internships at firms owned by family friends, a semester abroad that he frequently mentioned in conversations, and various leadership positions in university organizations that seemed to involve more social events than actual responsibility. Yet here he was 8 months out of graduate school, already positioned as a rising star in a company where others had spent years proving themselves. "Morning, team," Brad announced, settling into the chair at the head of the conference table. The spot I had assumed would be mine, given that this was my team's presentation. "Dad asked me to sit in on this one. Hope you don't mind." Of course we didn't mind. What choice did we have? The presentation began well enough. Marcus delivered our market analysis with his usual precision, highlighting demographic trends and consumer behavior patterns we'd identified through months of research. His slides showed heat maps of consumer activity, purchasing pattern analyses, and competitive landscape assessments that painted a comprehensive picture of Morrison's market opportunities. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours verifying every data point, cross-referencing sources, and building models that could withstand scrutiny from any angle. Jennifer followed with our creative strategy, showcasing mock-ups and brand positioning concepts that had taken weeks to develop and refine. Her presentation moved seamlessly from brand architecture to visual identity, from messaging frameworks to execution examples. Each creative concept had been tested through focus groups, refined based on feedback, and developed into comprehensive campaigns that addressed Morrison's specific challenges while highlighting their unique strengths. Her work represented the kind of strategic thinking that separated professional marketing from amateur advertising. The executive board members, Mr. Patterson from finance, Mrs. Rodriguez from operations, and Dr. Kim from strategic planning, nodded approvingly, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine engagement with our work. Their questions were the kind that came from decades of business experience, probing for details that would matter in real-world implementation, challenging assumptions in productive ways that helped strengthen our approach. I felt proud watching my team perform. These weren't just colleagues. They were professionals I had mentored, guided, and watched grow over the years. Each of them brought unique strengths to our department, and together we had built something special. A reputation for delivering innovative solutions that consistently exceeded client expectations. We had weathered challenging deadlines, celebrated major victories, and developed the kind of collaborative chemistry that made difficult projects manageable and successful campaigns possible. Watching them present work they had poured their hearts into reminded me why I loved this job despite its frustrations. Marketing, at its best, was about understanding human behavior and connecting people with products or services that genuinely improved their lives. It required creativity balanced with analytical thinking, strategic vision combined with tactical execution, and the ability to translate complex business objectives into compelling stories that resonated with real people. Our team had mastered this balance. We didn't just create pretty advertisements or catchy slogans. We developed comprehensive strategies that addressed real business challenges and delivered measurable results. Our client retention rate was the highest in the company, our campaigns consistently exceeded performance benchmarks, and our work had earned industry recognition that brought prestige to the entire firm. But as I stood to present our implementation timeline and budget projections, Brad interrupted. "Actually, Sarah, before you continue," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of casual authority, "I've been reviewing your team's approach and I have some concerns." The room fell silent. Raindrops continued their steady percussion against the windows, but inside, the atmosphere had shifted. My team exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting confusion and growing discomfort. The board members looked surprised. This wasn't how presentations typically unfolded. "Concerns," I managed, maintaining my professional composure despite feeling my heart rate accelerate. Brad stood up, walking to the front of the room with the kind of theatrical confidence that suggested he enjoyed being the center of attention. The Morrison account represents significant investment potential, and frankly, I'm not confident your team has the strategic vision necessary to maximize this opportunity. The words hit like a physical blow. 7 years of proven results, countless successful campaigns, industry recognition, and glowing client testimonials. None of it seemed to matter in that moment. I watched as my team members' faces registered shock, confusion, and growing anger on my behalf. Could you be more specific about these concerns? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Brad smiled that patronizing smile again. Well, for starters, your demographic analysis seems rather surface level. You've identified the obvious target markets, but you've missed several key opportunity segments that could significantly expand revenue potential. Marcus, who had spent 2 months conducting focus groups and analyzing consumer data, opened his mouth to respond, but Brad continued. Additionally, your creative concepts, while adequate, lack the innovative edge that Morrison expects from a premium marketing firm. They're safe, predictable, and frankly, a bit dated for today's dynamic marketplace. Jennifer's face flushed red. Her creative concepts had been praised by every client we'd worked with, earning our team 3 industry awards in the past 2 years. But she remained silent, understanding the precarious nature of challenging the boss's son in front of the executive board. The worst part wasn't the criticism itself. Every project faces scrutiny, and constructive feedback helps teams improve. The worst part was the way Brad delivered his assessment, with an air of superiority that suggested our months of work were beneath serious consideration. His tone implied that we were children playing at business while he represented adult supervision. I've taken the liberty of developing an alternative approach, Brad continued, producing his own laptop and connecting it to the projector. Something with more strategic sophistication. What followed was 20 minutes of generic marketing buzzwords strung together with expensive graphics and consultant speak that said nothing meaningful about the Morrison account specifically. Brad's presentation featured stock photos, template slides, and recommendations so broad they could apply to virtually any client in any industry. It was the kind of superficial proposal that looked impressive to people who didn't understand marketing but offered no actionable insights or measurable objectives. Yet the board members nodded politely, asked respectful questions, and praised Brad's fresh perspective and innovative thinking. The politics were obvious to everyone in the room, but corporate hierarchy demanded we all pretend otherwise. When Brad finished, he turned to me with that smile again. Sarah, I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's just business. Sometimes experience needs to be balanced with fresh insights and contemporary approaches. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was 26 years old with 8 months of corporate experience, dismissing the work of a team with decades of combined expertise. But more than that, he was doing it publicly, in front of my team and the executive board, ensuring maximum humiliation. I appreciate your feedback, I replied, choosing my words carefully. Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss integrating both approaches. Actually, I think it would be best if I take point on the Morrison account going forward, Brad announced. This represents too significant an opportunity to risk on unproven strategies. Unproven strategies. From a man whose biggest previous accomplishment was organizing company social events and attending networking conferences. The meeting concluded with Brad receiving congratulations for his proactive leadership and strategic insights. My team filed out in stunned silence. Months of their work dismissed in favor of a presentation thrown together the night before by someone who had never managed an account, never worked directly with clients, and never been held accountable for measurable results. Back at our desks, the atmosphere was heavy with frustration and disbelief. Marcus was unusually quiet, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Jennifer kept shaking her head, muttering about corporate politics and nepotism. David, normally our peacekeeper, looked genuinely angry for the first time since I'd known him. This is bullshit, Sarah, Lisa finally said, voicing what everyone was thinking. Your leadership has made this department what it is. Brad Richardson couldn't manage a lemonade stand, let alone a $2 million account. Tom nodded agreement. We've worked our asses off for months. Every detail, every analysis, every creative concept, it was solid work, professional work. And he just dismissed it like it meant nothing. I appreciated their loyalty, but I also understood the reality of our situation. Challenging Brad meant challenging his father, which meant risking all our jobs. Corporate politics required careful navigation, especially when family dynamics were involved. We'll figure this out, I told them, though I wasn't sure how. The next few days were a masterclass in workplace toxicity that went far beyond simple micromanagement. Brad scheduled daily check-ins with my team members, ostensibly to align strategic objectives, but actually to micromanage every aspect of their work in ways that suggested he fundamentally misunderstood how creative and analytical processes actually functioned. He questioned their methods without understanding the reasoning behind them, second-guessed their decisions based on theoretical knowledge rather than practical experience, and generally treated accomplished professionals like incompetent interns who couldn't be trusted with basic responsibilities. These weren't collaborative discussions aimed at improving outcomes. They were interrogations designed to assert dominance and demonstrate authority. Brad would arrive at these meetings with printouts of articles from business magazines, generic best practices guides downloaded from the internet, and theoretical frameworks that sounded impressive but had little relevance to our specific clients or industry challenges. Marcus, who had successfully managed market research projects for dozens of major clients, found himself explaining basic analytical concepts to someone who had never conducted primary research. Jennifer, whose creative work had won industry awards and generated millions in client revenue, was lectured about contemporary design trends by someone whose aesthetic experience appeared limited to PowerPoint templates and stock photography. Meanwhile, I found myself increasingly marginalized in ways both subtle and obvious. Meetings I had historically led were suddenly reassigned to Brad without explanation or discussion. Client communications that had previously gone through me were redirected to him, disrupting established relationships and confusing long-term partners who had worked with me for years. Projects I had developed over months were transferred to his oversight with no consultation, as if my institutional knowledge and client relationships were irrelevant details rather than valuable business assets. The systematic dismantling of my authority happened gradually enough that each individual change seemed minor, but collectively they represented a comprehensive effort to marginalize my role and diminish my influence. Email chains that had always included me suddenly stopped arriving in my inbox. Conference calls I had always joined were scheduled without my knowledge. Budget approvals I had always handled were redirected through different channels. The Morrison account, predictably, began experiencing problems almost immediately under Brad's management. His generic approach didn't account for Morrison's specific industry challenges, their unique competitive landscape, or the particular demographics they needed to reach. Where our team had developed targeted strategies based on extensive research and client consultation, Brad applied one-size-fits-all solutions that ignored Morrison's specific context and requirements. His timeline was unrealistic because it was based on theoretical project management principles rather than practical experience with similar campaigns. His budget projections were inflated because he didn't understand the actual costs of specialized services versus generic alternatives. His creative concepts failed to resonate with Morrison's target audience because they were developed in isolation from real consumer insights and market research. Within 2 weeks, Morrison's CEO called expressing concerns about the campaign direction and requesting a meeting to discuss realigning expectations. The phrase was corporate speak for, "This isn't working, and we need to figure out whether to fix it or find a new agency." It was the kind of call that should have triggered immediate internal review and course correction, the kind of warning sign that experienced account managers recognize and address before relationships deteriorate beyond repair. But rather than acknowledge these mounting problems, Brad doubled down on his approach and began blaming my team for implementation failures that stemmed directly from his flawed strategy. According to him, his strategic vision was sound. It was their execution that was lacking. This deflection of responsibility was particularly frustrating because my team members were implementing his directives exactly as specified, but those directives were based on misunderstandings of both the client's needs and the market realities. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon during our weekly department meeting. Brad had called the meeting to discuss performance optimization and team accountability measures. The conference room felt smaller than usual, cramped with tension and unspoken frustration. "I've been analyzing productivity metrics," Brad began, consulting a tablet filled with charts and graphs, "and I'm seeing some concerning patterns in this department's output quality and efficiency ratings." He clicked through slides showing various performance indicators, most of which had been trending positively for months before his arrival but were now beginning to decline, a direct result of his management style and the team's demoralization. "Marcus, your market research on the Morrison account has been inadequate. The demographic segmentation lacks nuance, and your competitive analysis missed several key players in their sector." Marcus, who had conducted the most comprehensive market research in the company's history, remained silent, but his jaw was clenched tight. "Jennifer, your creative concepts aren't meeting contemporary standards. They feel dated, unimaginative, and frankly, beneath the caliber of work Morrison expects from a premium agency. Jennifer's hands were folded in her lap, but I could see them trembling slightly with suppressed anger. Brad continued systematically critiquing each team member's work, using corporate buzzwords to disguise personal attacks and undermine their confidence. It was psychological warfare disguised as performance management. Finally, he turned to me. Sarah, as senior project manager, the buck stops with you. This team's declining performance reflects directly on your leadership capabilities. I'm beginning to question whether you have the strategic vision necessary to guide this department through its next growth phase. The room was dead silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Rain had started falling again outside, creating that same rhythmic backdrop that had accompanied our meeting 2 weeks earlier. But this time, something inside me had shifted. 7 years. 7 years of late nights, weekend work, missed family dinners, and sacrificed vacations. 7 years of building relationships with clients, mentoring team members, and consistently exceeding performance targets. 7 years of dedication to a company that was now allowing a nepotistic 26-year-old to systematically dismantle everything I had built. I looked around the table at my team, professionals I had hired, trained, and watched grow into experts in their fields. People who trusted me, respected me, and had followed my leadership through challenging projects and tight deadlines. They were watching me now, waiting to see how I would respond to this latest humiliation. That's when I realized something important. Respect isn't given based on titles or family connections. It's earned through competence, integrity, and treating people with dignity. And Brad Richardson had demonstrated none of these qualities. I stood up slowly, my chair sliding back with a soft scraping sound against the tile floor. You're absolutely right, Brad, I said, my voice calm and measured. The buck does stop with me. And as the person responsible for this team's performance and well-being, I have an announcement to make. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out an envelope I had prepared that morning after another sleepless night of wrestling with my decision. The envelope was crisp white paper, professionally addressed, and contained 2 weeks' notice of my resignation along with a detailed account of recent departmental changes and their impact on team morale and client relationships. But instead of handing it to Brad, I walked around the table to where Marcus was sitting. Marcus, I said, my voice carrying throughout the now completely silent room. Could you please ensure this resignation letter reaches the appropriate member of senior management? I placed the envelope directly in front of him, but my words were clearly intended for Brad. The implication was unmistakable. I was treating him as what he truly was. Not senior management, not my supervisor, but simply another employee who happened to be related to the boss. Brad's face went through several color changes, from confusion to embarrassment to anger. Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I interrupted, my professional composure intact but my message crystal clear. I've spent 7 years building this department's reputation through hard work, expertise, and respect for both clients and colleagues. I refuse to watch it be dismantled by someone who mistakes privilege for competence. The silence in the room was profound. Through the windows, I could see other office buildings where people were working at their desks, probably dealing with their own corporate challenges and political complexities. But in this moment, in this room, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in weeks. I turned to address my team directly. Each of you is a talented professional who deserves to work in an environment that values your expertise and treats you with respect. Whatever you decide to do moving forward, remember that your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to recognize your contributions. Jennifer was the first to stand up. Without saying a word, she gathered her materials and walked out of the conference room. Tom followed, then Lisa, then David. Finally, Marcus stood, picked up my resignation letter, and gave me a small nod before leaving. Brad and I were alone in the conference room, rain still pattering against the windows, fluorescent lights still humming overhead. He looked younger somehow, stripped of his artificial authority and forced to confront the reality of what had just happened. Sarah, maybe we can work this out, he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I didn't mean for things to escalate like this. The problem, Brad, isn't that things escalated, I replied, gathering my own materials. The problem is that you never understood what leadership actually means. It's not about having the right last name or the fanciest education. It's about earning respect through competence and treating people with dignity. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Good luck with the Morrison account. You're going to need it. The next 2 weeks were unlike anything I had experienced in my corporate career. Word of what had happened in that conference room spread quickly through the office, creating ripples that reached far beyond our department. My resignation letter, which Marcus had indeed delivered to senior management, sparked conversations about nepotism, workplace respect, and the difference between authority and leadership. Mr. Richardson Sr. called me into his office 3 days later. His corner office was impressive. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, awards and photos covering the walls. But the conversation was awkward and uncomfortable. He was clearly torn between supporting his son and acknowledging the obvious problems Brad's management style had created. "Sarah, I understand there have been some interpersonal challenges," he began diplomatically. "Perhaps we can find a way to restructure responsibilities that works better for everyone." I appreciated his attempt at diplomacy, but the damage was already done. "Mr. Richardson, with all due respect, this isn't about interpersonal challenges. This is about fundamental differences in how people should be treated in a professional environment." He nodded slowly, his expression suggesting he understood more than he was willing to say out loud. "I hope you'll reconsider your decision. Your contributions to this company have been significant." "I appreciate that acknowledgement," I replied. "But some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt." Meanwhile, my team was dealing with their own decisions. Jennifer had already begun interviewing with other agencies. Tom and Lisa were updating their resumes. David and Marcus were torn between loyalty to me and practical concerns about their careers and families. The Morrison account, predictably, continued to deteriorate. Within a week of my resignation meeting, Morrison's CEO had called requesting a complete strategy overhaul and threatening to terminate their contract if immediate improvements weren't implemented. Brad, faced with the reality of managing a major client relationship without the support system he had systematically dismantled, was struggling to maintain his confident facade. On my last day, something unexpected happened that reminded me why taking a principled stand sometimes resonates far beyond the immediate situation. I was cleaning out my desk, packing 7 years of career memories into cardboard boxes. Awards, client thank you notes, photos from successful campaign launches, and the small personal items that accumulate in any workspace over time. Each object represented a moment in my professional journey, a relationship built, or a challenge overcome. The process of sorting through these memories was more emotional than I had anticipated. There was the thank you card from Morrison's previous marketing director, praising our team's work on their original brand refresh 3 years earlier, a photo from our department's celebration dinner after winning the Regional Marketing Excellence Award, a small potted plant that Jennifer had given me for my birthday, now thriving under the office's fluorescent lights. As I was carefully wrapping a framed certificate from my first major campaign success, Jennifer approached with a small group of colleagues from other departments, people I had worked with on various projects over the years, some I barely knew beyond casual conversations in the break room or brief collaborations on cross-departmental initiatives. "Sarah, we wanted you to know that what you did in that meeting, it meant something to a lot of people in this company," she said, her voice carrying an emotion I hadn't expected. "You showed us that we don't have to accept disrespect just because it comes from someone with authority. You reminded us that our professional dignity matters, and that sometimes standing up for principles is worth more than maintaining comfortable silence." Tom nodded agreement, joined by several others who had gathered around my desk. "You could have just quit quietly, found another job, and moved on with your career like most people would have done. But you made a statement about dignity and self-respect that we won't forget. You showed us that there's a difference between professional disagreement and personal disrespect, and that we have the right to demand better treatment regardless of office politics or family connections." Over the following months, I learned that my resignation had triggered a broader conversation about workplace culture at Richardson Marketing Solutions. Several other employees had found the courage to speak up about various issues they had been quietly enduring. The company implemented new policies about professional conduct and conflict resolution, though whether Brad's behavior actually changed remained a subject of office speculation. As for me, I found a position with a smaller but more dynamic marketing firm where competence was valued over connections and leadership was earned through results rather than inherited through family relationships. My new colleagues treated me with the professional respect I had forgotten was possible, and I was able to focus on what I loved most about marketing, developing creative solutions to complex challenges. 6 months later, I learned that the Morrison account had ultimately been lost, costing Richardson Marketing Solutions not just the $2 million contract but also damaging their reputation in the industry. Jennifer, Tom, and Lisa had all found new positions where their talents were appreciated. Marcus and David eventually left as well, pursuing opportunities that offered better career growth and more positive work environments. The story became something of a legend in our local marketing community, not because of the dramatic resignation itself, but because it demonstrated that sometimes standing up for yourself and your principles is worth more than maintaining the status quo. Word spread through professional networks about the importance of workplace respect and the dangers of nepotistic hiring practices that prioritize family connections over qualifications. Looking back, I realized that moment in the conference room wasn't just about Brad Richardson or one toxic workplace situation. It was about recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminished my dignity as a professional and as a person. It was about understanding that real leadership means earning respect through actions rather than demanding it through authority. The rain that had been falling during both of those pivotal meetings eventually stopped, of course. Seasons changed, new projects began, and life moved forward as it always does. But the lesson remained clear. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept what's unacceptable, especially when it costs you something to take that stand. Your career, your self-respect, and your professional relationships are too valuable to sacrifice for someone else's ego or family politics. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing to invest your talents somewhere they'll be valued and your contributions will be respected. And that, ultimately, is a lesson worth remembering.